On January 23, 2025, former U.S. President Donald Trump made headlines with a bold statement urging Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the ongoing war in Ukraine. He threatened to impose high tariffs and additional sanctions on Russian goods if the conflict, which has persisted since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022, does not come to a swift resolution. Trump shared his remarks on his social media platform Truth Social, where he framed the call for a settlement as a significant opportunity for both Russia and its struggling economy. Trump's comments came amidst a backdrop of escalating tensions and ongoing military engagement in Ukraine. He emphasized that a negotiated settlement would benefit Russia, suggesting that failure to reach an agreement would leave him with no other choice but to impose economic penalties on Russian imports to the United States and its allies. He stated, "Let's get this war, which never would have started if I were president, over with. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, and the easy way is always better. It's time to make a deal." In his remarks, Trump also indicated his intention to engage in discussions with Putin soon, hinting that if negotiations do not progress further, sanctions are likely. He characterized the ongoing war as ridiculous and underscored the urgency of a resolution, claiming that the situation would only worsen if left unaddressed. The response from Ukraine has been mixed, with President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasizing the need for a substantial peacekeeping force, potentially including American troops, to ensure any peace agreement is respected. This reflects a broader skepticism within Ukraine regarding the effectiveness of sanctions alone in deterring Russian aggression. Many in Kiev have expressed doubts about the tangible impact of Trump's threats, calling for concrete actions rather than mere rhetoric. In contrast, the Kremlin's reaction to Trump's statements has been measured. Russian officials, including Deputy UN Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky, have indicated the need for clarity on what Trump envisions in terms of a peace deal before considering any negotiations. The complexity of the situation is further exacerbated by the longstanding territorial disputes stemming from Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its ongoing occupation of parts of eastern Ukraine. The dynamics of the situation are particularly fraught, with Trump's remarks occurring at a time when public sentiment in Ukraine remains wary. While there is a recognition that Trump's tougher stance may resonate with some in Kiev, the prevailing sentiment is one of skepticism regarding the effectiveness of sanctions as a deterrent against Russia. Many Ukrainians are looking for more substantial support from the US and its allies to counter the ongoing threat. Moreover, there are signs of potential shifts within Russia itself. Some Russian media and hardliners have expressed frustration over what they perceive as a retreat from earlier, more aggressive military objectives. This has led to discussions in Moscow about possibly accepting less than a complete victory in Ukraine, with some suggesting that a halt to fighting along the current front line might be a realistic outcome. This shift in rhetoric has raised concerns among Russian nationalists who are unhappy with any notion of compromise. As the conflict continues, Trump's call for an end to the ridiculous war highlights a potential shift in U.S. foreign policy rhetoric towards Russia. However, the effectiveness of such threats remains uncertain, and the ongoing discussions about sanctions, military support, and the feasibility of negotiations will be critical in shaping future developments. In summary, Trump's recent statements underscore the complexities of the conflict in Ukraine and the intricate interplay of international relations involved. While his rhetoric may suggest a more assertive stance against Russia, the realities on the ground in Ukraine, the responses from both Kiev and Moscow, and the broader geopolitical landscape will significantly influence the outcome of any potential negotiations. Donald Trump has publicly urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the ongoing war in Ukraine, threatening new sanctions and tariffs if he does not comply. This statement was made on Trump's social media platform Truth Social, where he emphasized that reaching a settlement would be beneficial for both Russia and its economy, which he characterized as struggling. He stated that if a deal is not reached soon, he would have no other choice but to impose high tariffs and sanctions on Russian goods entering the United States and other allied countries. In his comments, Trump suggested that the conflict, which began with Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and escalated into a full-scale invasion in February 2022, could be resolved quickly if he were in charge as president. He indicated that he would soon be speaking with Putin and that more sanctions were likely if negotiations did not advance. Trump's rhetoric included a call for a peaceful resolution, framing it as the easy way compared to the hard way, which would involve escalating economic penalties against Russia. While Trump's remarks have garnered attention, the response from Ukraine has been mixed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized the necessity of a significant peacekeeping force, potentially including American troops, to ensure any agreement is respected. This sentiment reflects a broader skepticism in Kiev regarding the effectiveness of sanctions alone, with many Ukrainians expressing doubts about the potential impact of Trump's threats. The Kremlin's response to Trump's statements has been cautious, with officials indicating a need to understand what specific terms Trump envisions for a peace deal. Russian Deputy UN Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky noted that clarity on Trump's demands would be essential before moving forward with any negotiations. From various sources, a few common themes emerge: the urgency for a resolution to the conflict, the economic implications for Russia, and the skepticism from Ukraine regarding the effectiveness of sanctions. However, while Trump's tone appears to have shifted towards a more assertive stance against Russia, some reports suggest that Russian media and hardliners are expressing frustration over perceived retreat from earlier, more aggressive military objectives. In summary, Trump's call for Putin to end the ridiculous war underscores a potential shift in U.S. foreign policy rhetoric towards Russia, although the effectiveness of such threats remains to be seen. As the conflict continues, the dynamics between the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine will remain critical, with ongoing discussions about the role of sanctions, military presence, and the feasibility of negotiations shaping future developments. The report on Donald Trump's recent statements regarding the conflict in Ukraine and his communication with Vladimir Putin contains several noteworthy elements that may be overlooked by many readers. Here are some key points and their significance. 1. Trump's shift in rhetoric. Trump's call for Putin to end the ridiculous war and his threat of sanctions marks a notable shift in his rhetoric compared to previous statements, where he seemed to express more understanding of Russia's position. This change is significant as it could signal a potential realignment of U.S. foreign policy should Trump return to office. His previous comments often downplayed Ukraine's sovereignty, which could have implications for how U.S. support for Ukraine is structured moving forward. Observers should consider how this shift may resonate with different factions within the Republican Party and among international allies. 2. Economic implications for Russia. Trump's assertion that he would impose high tariffs and sanctions if Russia does not comply reveals an understanding of the economic strain on Russia. This point is significant because it underscores the potential leverage the U.S. could exert over Russia's economy, particularly as it grapples with the fallout of prolonged conflict and existing sanctions. Economic stability is a critical factor in Russia's decision-making, and any new sanctions could exacerbate its difficulties, possibly leading to a change in strategy regarding Ukraine. 3. Ukrainian skepticism. The mixed response from Ukrainian leadership, particularly President Zelensky's insistence on the need for a significant peacekeeping force, reflects deep skepticism about negotiations that exclude substantial military support. The mention of needing U.S. troops as part of any peacekeeping mission highlights Ukraine's reliance on American military and diplomatic backing. This is significant because it points to the challenges of achieving a peace agreement without a robust security guarantee, making the prospect of a durable settlement more complex. 4. Kremlin's cautious response. The Kremlin's measured reaction to Trump's statements indicates a strategic approach to international communications. Russian officials expressed a need for clarity on Trump's peace terms, suggesting that they are preparing for a negotiation phase, albeit with caution. This is significant as it reflects the Kremlin's desire to control the narrative and maintain diplomatic options, potentially preparing the ground for future concessions or compromises that could redefine territorial discussions. 5. public sentiment in Ukraine. The scathing social media response from Ukrainians towards Trump's threats of sanctions suggests a broader disillusionment with diplomatic rhetoric that does not translate into actionable support. This sentiment is significant as it highlights the urgency and frustration felt by those directly affected by the conflict. It raises questions about the effectiveness of sanctions as a deterrent strategy and the need for more substantial measures that go beyond economic penalties. 6. Potential for renewed negotiations. Trump's claim that he could resolve the conflict quickly if he were president introduces the prospect of renewed negotiations. His confidence could appeal to certain segments of the U.S. electorate who desire a swift resolution to international conflicts. The significance here lies in the potential for a different diplomatic approach that may prioritize negotiations over military engagement, which could alter the landscape of U.S. foreign policy. 7. Media coverage and narrative control. The report highlights how Russian media is reacting to the potential for a negotiated settlement, with some figures suggesting a pivot toward accepting less ambitious goals than previously stated. This indicates a possible softening of positions within Russia, which may reflect internal pressures to adapt to the realities of ongoing conflict. The significance of this narrative control is crucial as it shapes public perception within Russia and could influence future policy decisions. In summary, the critical content of Trump's statements and the surrounding reactions encapsulate a complex interplay of international relations, domestic politics, and economic strategy. The points outlined above emphasize the significance of these dynamics, which have far-reaching implications for the future of U.S. Russia-Ukraine relations. Readers should pay close attention to these nuances, as they may foreshadow shifts in policy and strategy that could affect global stability. 1. Trump's shift in rhetoric and proposed strategy. Donald Trump's recent statements represent a notable shift in his rhetoric regarding the Ukraine conflict. He has publicly urged Vladimir Putin to end the war, framing the resolution as beneficial for both Russia and its struggling economy. Trump suggests that negotiations could lead to a quick resolution, claiming that such a deal would be a very big favor to Russia. This approach contrasts with his earlier positions that seemed more sympathetic to Russian interests. The implications of this shift could be significant in terms of U.S. foreign policy and its approach towards Russia, especially if Trump were to regain the presidency. 2. Economic implications of sanctions and tariffs. Trump's threat of imposing high tariffs and additional sanctions on Russian goods underscores the economic dimension of the conflict. He highlights the failing Russian economy as a key motivator for Putin to settle the conflict, suggesting that continued aggression will lead to further economic isolation. The effectiveness of sanctions as a tool for diplomatic negotiation is debated, with skepticism from Ukrainian officials who question whether sanctions alone can compel Russia to change its course. The potential impact of new sanctions on both the Russian economy and global markets warrants in-depth exploration, particularly in light of existing sanctions already crippling vital sectors. 3. Ukrainian response and skepticism. The response from Ukraine, particularly from President Volodymyr Zelensky, reveals a complex view of Trump's statements. While Zelensky acknowledges the need for a significant peacekeeping force to ensure any agreement is respected, he expresses skepticism about the effectiveness of sanctions as a deterrent. This highlights the broader Ukrainian sentiment that military strength and international support are necessary to counter Russian aggression. The mixed reactions from Ukrainian leadership reflect the tension between seeking peace and the reality of territorial integrity, emphasizing the need for a more robust approach to negotiations that addresses security concerns. 4. Kremlin's cautious stance and potential for negotiation. The Kremlin's cautious response to Trump's statements suggests a desire for clarity on the terms of any potential peace deal. Russian officials indicate a willingness to negotiate but emphasize the need to understand what Trump envisions. This reflects not only the complexities of the diplomatic landscape but also the internal dynamics within Russia, where hardliners may resist any perceived concessions. Analyzing the Kremlin's position, including its public and private responses to Trump's threats, can provide insight into Russia's strategic calculations and the potential for renewed dialogue or further escalation in the conflict. 1. The Munich Agreement 1938. This agreement was a settlement reached between Germany, the United Kingdom, France and Italy that allowed Nazi Germany to annex the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously declared that the agreement brought peace for our time. However, it is often considered a failed attempt at appeasement, as it did not prevent World War II. The Munich Agreement serves as a historical case of how negotiations with aggressive powers can be fraught with challenges and may lead to greater conflict. 2. The Treaty of Versailles 1919. The Treaty of Versailles was signed at the end of World War I and imposed heavy reparations and territorial losses on Germany. The treaty was intended to establish peace but ultimately sowed the seeds for World War II due to its harsh terms and the economic hardships it created in Germany. The failure of the treaty to create a lasting peace exemplifies the difficulties in negotiating settlements after major conflicts and the consequences of punitive measures. 3. The Iran Nuclear Deal 2015, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action JCPOA. This agreement was reached between Iran and 6 world powers, the US, UK, France, Russia, China, and Germany, to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for relief from economic sanctions. The deal was controversial, with critics arguing that it did not go far enough to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The U.S. withdrawal from the agreement in 2018 under President Trump led to increased tensions and ultimately stalled negotiations, demonstrating the complexities and challenges in diplomatic agreements involving sanctions and compliance. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has significantly influenced global geopolitics, and recent developments involving Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have the potential to shape the future landscape of international relations. Trump's call for Putin to end the war or face new sanctions reflects a critical moment in U.S.-Russia relations, providing insights into potential future scenarios. 1. Increased pressure on Russia. In the immediate future, Trump's threat of high tariffs and sanctions if Putin does not comply could escalate economic pressure on Russia. The effectiveness of such measures is contingent on the coordination between the U.S. and its allies. If implemented, these sanctions could deepen Russia's economic struggles, potentially leading to greater internal dissent and a re-evaluation of its military objectives in Ukraine. However, the Kremlin may resist these pressures, leading to a protracted standoff. 2. Potential for negotiations. Trump's assertion that he could quickly negotiate a settlement may open pathways for dialogue, although the skepticism from Ukraine about the efficacy of sanctions poses challenges. The likelihood of meaningful negotiations will heavily depend on the willingness of both Russia and Ukraine to compromise. Ukraine's insistence on maintaining territorial integrity contrasts with Russia's demands for recognition of its territorial gains, highlighting the complexities of reaching an agreement. 3. Role of military presence. Ukrainian President Zelensky's call for a substantial peacekeeping force, potentially including U.S. troops, indicates that any resolution will likely require a robust international security framework. The future may see an increased U.S. military presence in Europe as a deterrent against further Russian aggression. This could lead to a recalibration of NATO's strategic posture, reinforcing its eastern flank in response to perceived threats. 4. Domestic political dynamics. Trump's position may influence domestic politics in the U.S., particularly as the 2024 presidential election approaches. A strong stance against Russia could galvanize support from constituents who prioritize national security. Conversely, any perceived weakness or failure to enact promised sanctions could undermine his credibility. The interplay between foreign policy and domestic political considerations will be crucial in shaping U.S. actions moving forward. 5. Shifts in Russian strategy. The Kremlin's cautious response to Trump's statements may indicate a potential recalibration of its strategy. Russian officials have hinted at a willingness to explore negotiations, albeit under conditions favorable to Moscow. If the conflict escalates further without resolution, Russia may seek to consolidate its territorial gains while preparing for a long-term engagement, potentially increasing its military presence in occupied regions. 6. Global economic implications. The imposition of new sanctions could have wide-ranging economic repercussions beyond Russia, affecting global markets and supply chains. Countries heavily reliant on Russian exports may face economic challenges, prompting them to seek alternative sources. The interconnectedness of global economies means that any escalation in sanctions could lead to increased volatility in energy markets, particularly in Europe. 7. Long-term impact on U.S.-Russia relations. Trump's rhetoric signifies a potential shift in U.S. foreign policy towards a more confrontational stance. However, the long-term impact on U.S.-Russia relations will depend on the outcomes of negotiations and the effectiveness of sanctions. A successful resolution could pave the way for a new era of diplomacy, while continued hostilities would likely entrench adversarial relations, setting the stage for future conflicts. 8. The role of international organizations. The future may also see a more active role for international organizations in mediating the conflict. The United Nations and other multilateral entities could be called upon to facilitate dialogue and ensure compliance with any agreements reached. The effectiveness of these organizations will depend on their ability to navigate the complexities of international politics and garner support from major powers. 9. Influence of public opinion. Public sentiment in both Russia and Ukraine will play a crucial role in shaping the future of the conflict. In Ukraine, the desire to reclaim lost territory may fuel resistance to any agreements perceived as unfavorable. In Russia, public support for the war may wane if economic conditions deteriorate further, leading to increased pressure on the Kremlin to seek a resolution. 10. Broader geopolitical implications. The situation in Ukraine serves as a microcosm of broader geopolitical tensions, particularly between NATO and Russia. The outcome of this conflict could influence relationships beyond Europe, affecting U.S. positions in Asia and the Middle East. As countries observe the dynamics at play, they may reassess their own security strategies and alliances. In conclusion, the future outlook for the conflict in Ukraine and U.S.-Russia relations is fraught with uncertainty. While Trump's threats may impose immediate pressure on Russia, the complexities of negotiation, military presence, and global economic implications will significantly influence the trajectory of the conflict. The interplay of domestic politics, international diplomacy, and public opinion will ultimately shape how this situation evolves in the months and years to come.